This is a 1913 Mullins Special. Had underwater exhaust and water discharge. You can see it right there. And had a rudder steering. Flotation tanks in the front and a gas tank in the rear. They're both original. They still work fine, don't leak. Thank the good Lord. And the boat is pretty much the way it was originally. It's had a few pieces replaced. Like this deck piece right here has been replaced. The other ones are original. The cap rail has been replaced. But the two side railings are still original, riveted in. And the transom has one piece here that's been replaced. And other than that, it's pretty original. It was used for moving logs on Sebago Lake. It had it probably had a Mullins engine made by Faro. It was exactly the same as this one, two-stroke, two-port engine. And it has a water-cooled exhaust manifold, a piece of pipe with the back side of it cut off. And this engine right here is the same year or same era as the engine that was in it originally. It's a Faro, like I say, a Faro two-port, two-cycle. And this was sort of a simplified version. Originally, Faro had one that actually had oil feed from a base that fed oil to all appropriate points. This one has a drip feed, which is a lot simpler. And I think, from what I understand, the oil pressure one's clogged up. But the engine that was in this boat originally, it could have been either a Faro or a Mullins, but they're both exactly the same, just a different name tag on it. This one right here says Faro. When I bought the boat, it had a 4-cycle, 5-horsepower Sears Roebuck made by Kale, and it was way too heavy, and the boat it would squat right down in the water, and it was very hard to handle, and it was too much horsepower, and it really didn't go good at all. With this engine, it goes very, very nicely, behaves very, very well. It also has an auxiliary Old Joe's transmission, forward, neutral, reverse. I think they call them reverse gears. They still do. And it was this brochure right here is an original brochure, the Mullins Corporation. And I think we were somewhere in here. You can see what the engines looked like. This was, like I say, this pretty much showing a Faro cooling system and cylinder. Then we come here to the last page, and this was the Mullins 16-foot special launch. That's what this one is. I used this to make the floorboards, which were missing out of this boat. You can see they're pretty close to original. I had this book to go by, and I've had to guess on some of the stuff as to where the batteries were stored. I made a box for them underneath the seat. I figured that was the place where they belonged. And this was a deluxe version to some degree. The cushions were extra, which I did not have made. But other than that, with the reverse gear, it is the same job right here. And you can see the engine's identical to what I have. And it handles very, very well. It's basically a rowboat. The boat does row extremely well. Goes through water very, very well. I had some problems with the original engine early on. I took it to a meet and I had to row it back about 2 miles, and it rode very, very, very slipped through the water. And I'm quite pleased with the way it handles. I've had it for a number of years, and I'm ready to move it on. It's a good-looking boat. I finished it with the original silver goop finish. Still available, what they used. And the inside was done with this green. I was able to find the original green stain up when I took the deck off. It was still there. So I tried to duplicate that. The seats are still original. You can see they're not in perfect condition, but they're not bad. And the steering system, you can see there's a steering station where the guy who runs it sits back here and gets completely splattered with oil, grease, and so forth, and you have to oil it with an oil can and turn in the grease cups. There's 2 of them, one for each end of the cylinder, and you've got a timing advance up here, and you've got a throttle right here, and you've got the drip feed oiler, which I do not use. I mix the oil 50 to 1, or probably more like 25 to 1 to be on the safe side. It's a pretty old engine, and it's a good goer. It slips through the water. It's not a speedboat, that's for sure. It probably was in its day, but I had to, the engine came from, actually when I found it, came from out in Islesboro, no, not Islesboro, out in Martha's Vineyard. And it was a saltwater engine, and the outer water jacket was just completely hashed. So I have some old engine repair books, and I did what they used to do in those days, is take copper and fit it to the area that was pretty well cracked and corroded and so forth, and I glued it in. And the first time I did it, I used 5200, which unfortunately, with the antifreeze I put in, which was non-tox antifreeze, it disintegrated and fell off. So I used marine sealant, something a little bit different, a silicone sealant, and it seems to have held up very, very well. It doesn't leak and works quite well. It's a crank start. I converted it to a basically to a rope start because I don't particularly want to lose my arm. This is the crank start right here. I made it, and it does work, but as I say, they're very, very dangerous. If you have your spark advance too far and they kick back, they can break your arm, and that happened quite frequently back in the old days. And there's old Joe's reverse gear. And it does run very, very well. I've added a few things. I added a shut-off for the fuel, and I isolated the spark and so forth a little bit better than they showed it, but it runs good. I had original set of dry cell batteries I used were actual carbon dry cells, and they lasted about 6 years. I mean, they didn't run it hard. They didn't run it a lot every year, but I ran it. This set is, they're about a tenth filled, and I think there's newer alkylate batteries or whatever, and they didn't last but a couple of years before they were dead. So they're just in there for decoration right now. I'm running it on a 7.5 volt NiCad. This Mullins is 2 pieces of galvanized steel that are joined together in the middle. At the bow and underneath along the keel, it's folded over a wooden keel and soldered. And it does leak a little bit along there, especially around where the shaft comes out. And you can see it maybe a little bit better back here. You can see where it's been soldered a great deal along the edge. And you can see where I've been running the boat. It's dripping a little bit. I had some leakage coming out of my water pump, and she got into the boat. And it does leak, but nothing ferocious. But I do have a little bilge pump rigged up right here, which pulls right out of the keel area. And you can see you can see the pressed steel here where my feet have been. The ribs are for the most part wood, but there are 2 either side of this engine that the engine bed is mounted on that are steel, and they seem to work well. They've got some rather large bolts in them. You can see where the bolts came up through from those steel ribs in to mount the engine bed itself, and then another one over there. And there's one or two on the other side. And the rest of it is ribs. I had to replace 4 or 5 of them. They're continuous. They go through the keel and back out again. But as I say, the boat runs very, very well and doesn't leak too badly. 2021, Bill Andrewaitis at the helm of the Mullins Special with a Faro 3 horsepower. 1913. Some too. There we go. Nice. So what happens is it blows up. Fosty says, this is the end of the show.
That's all.
Goodbye.